Welcome back to the Augustana Observer Podcast. I'm your host, Jaren Smith, and I wanted to let my guests introduce themselves.
My name is Mike Hudson. I am a senior here at Augustana. I am majoring in finance, minoring in philosophy. And just to roll right into this, I'd like to say I am in no way, a super credible source on what we're going to be talking about. In terms of Marvel business-related stuff, I was actually recommended to this podcast by my professor who was originally reached out to for this interview or podcast, Dr. Thornblad. And I think there was actually a cross in the communications of what was supposed to be talked about. So I'm in a group with Kayla Pilsner, is that how you say her name?
Pelzer, I believe.
Pelzer, yeah. Great group member. She's in my class. We work really well together. And she recommended, I think, to you, Dr. Thornblad is what she told me, just because his whole focus is looking at businesses, seeing where they go wrong, and how to flip those businesses and, regain what they've lost in the past, if they lost something, or what they can do to, acquire new businesses to propel them into the future, right? So when she recommended him to you, she was focusing more on the business side of what Disney can do in terms of Marvel. And I think the communication got crossed where it's what can Marvel movies do better to get their fans back as in a fan base, which he saw Dr. Thornblad as, well, I would have to know what Marvel movies entail, have to see Marvel movies, I have to know the fan base, which he admitted to not seeing Marvel movies, not being a fan of the Marvel movies for whatever reason. And the reason I got recommended was because we were doing a focus study on Disney itself and all the different businesses they're in and, their different, departments, including Marvel, and how in the past that has been on the decline. And during our discussions, this was before the Marvels came out, and he said, they're constantly trying to get their fans back and coming out with new movies to re-spark what they had with the Infinity Saga, right? And he says, and they're hoping the Marvel's going to do that. Like, the CEO was like, we're, projecting that this is going to do really well. And I spoke up in class and I said, there's no way it's going to do well. And he seemed very surprised by this. I didn't think it was a super, unpopular opinion or really in-depth or anything, but I gave my opinion as to why it wasn't going to succeed. And then it didn't succeed. And then he came to class one day and he's like, I saw an article that the Marvels bombed. And it's like, wow, you really predicted that. I'm like, it's not really... I don't think that I'm at all super qualified to be like, oh yeah, I saw it a mile away because I'm an expert. In no way I'm an expert. But it was enough to get his attention that I have some, background in what we're going to be talking about today. So I just thought I'd lay that out there as why I'm here and why I'm talking about this.
I understand. And kind of with the communication with Dr. Thornblad, it was more so my mistake because initially, how I was sending you emails, I would send them to him. And I didn't send a very clear email with what I was wanting because with what Kayla told you, that was the original plan.
Right.
But with me talking about through the fan base, I can see why there was confusion. But ultimately, I had two directions I was interested in going in from, a business side to more so the creativity side, more so with the movies until themselves. Because instead of the business, and in my personal opinion, I do feel with, Marvel as Disney as a business and then what their creative side does, do feel they go very hand in hand because if these movies were not very creative, the MCU would not be as we know it today. But I think this is a great transition into our first question.
Okay.
How did you kind of have an interest in the MCU? Was it I know you're saying that you're not really a big expert. Me neither. Yeah. I'm not an expert at all. But where does your interest in Marvel come from?
Well, just another forewarning. I have not seen some of the more recent Marvels. So me getting introduced to it was how most people did. What really launched it was Iron Man, right? That was the biggest MCU that launched the Infinity Saga, that launched it all, was the success of Iron Man. I'd say that's where it's really started for me. You could argue before that Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire were also my jam. but that's not a really official like Marvel and Disney. So I would probably say the best answer would be the Iron Man movies. But from there, I saw everything, all the way through Endgame, and I saw Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, and the newest Spider-Man movie, and but I haven't seen the Marvels. Like I said, I just predicted that it was not going to do well just based on various factors. But I guess that answers your question.
Yeah, I understand. I'd say same for myself. Like the family I come from, like I always say that I come from a big family full of nerds. Like my dad, huge into that type of stuff. He got my older sister into it, who in turn got my older brother into it,
right.
That in turn got me. But another good kind of segue into this, which this might play on your prediction with the Marvels movie. I haven't seen it either yet.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the MCU as of today? By today, I more so mean like just with, because, as they're kind of coming out with movies, the Marvels movie came out, I believe, about 3 weeks ago now, and I'm sure there's other projects, kind of coming on the way. So really just what are your thoughts on the MCU right now?
I had a lot of time to think about this, and this is not a very easy, one-sided question. There's a lot of elements to this, but to relate to what I've learned here at Augustana, one of the coolest things I learned actually in my marketing class was something called the Maya principle. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I have not.
So it's most acceptable. No, sorry. It's most. Oh gosh, I'm blanking. It's early in the morning.
No worries.
It's like not accelerated, but it's like something that catches your eye because it's new, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I'm blanking on the A word, but it's like yet acceptable. No, the whole principle is behind like you can introduce a product and it can be revolutionary, but it can be so new that people can reject it because it's not like they're not used to the concept of it yet. And I feel like the biggest thing in that class was actually Meta's Quest, their VR headset. Mm-hmm. It's like such a new product that they're trying to push onto people but they're really trying to push it as a wide market. But it's such a thing that's like people can't really grasp the concept of the VR as something as easy as the Xbox, say, because that's like a gaming console. You put in a game or you download a game and you play it, right? And Meta at that time, and I still think people were confused about how do I get the games? Like, do I need a PC with this? Do I need a certain console with this? And it's like, it gets into a confusing aspect of people don't know what to do with it. They know it's cool and they can understand that, hey, this is really cool, but it's not for me just because of how new it is. And this goes into a lot of psychology with people, like, they like new things, but not too new. And why I like to connect with that with the Maya principle is there's a lot of aspects of what Marvel does right and what Marvel does wrong, and then what Marvel does better than, let's say, DC. What I think really goes wrong with DC, they have the characters, they have the stories, they have A-list actors in their movies. One thing that's really a turnoff for me in the DC movies is how CGI'd everything seems. Like, everything's, like, besides the heads of the actors, even most of the time, everything, the backgrounds, everything they're working with is just computer animated, and it gives you this it's an uneasy feeling almost, and it really relates back to, again, my also concentration philosophy. It's called Bentham's experience machine. Mm-hmm. And that whole philosophy is behind, like, people, even if it gives you everything you want in terms of happiness, fulfillment, if people know that they're stepping in a machine and it's all artificial, mm-hmm. they're not going to want to step in that machine because that is not a true life that they're living. Because mm-hmm. even before they step into it, they completely are brainwashed into what reality and, fiction or stepping, because like stepping in a movie is stepping into another world, right? You're being told a story, you're being immersed into another world. Mm-hmm. But you have to keep elements that are real. I think that is the biggest thing.
I agree with that 100%.
That's what Iron Man did really well, right? Mm-hmm. The example, I went through this interview already with my girlfriend, so kind of already prepared for this, but one of the things that Iron Man did really well was you can put yourself into that world so easily that a billionaire creates a super tech that's mm-hmm. like that can save lives, and he himself can step into it, and the technology is so advanced but still acceptable because it's still just a suit of techie armor, right? Yeah. And then when he puts it on and he's flying around, what is it, LA it seems like?
Yeah. For the most part, I think like all of the Iron Man movies are set in LA. Actually, wait, no. I can't speak for all of them, but I think it's actually New York because
Is it New York?
Because the first Avengers movie. Because I'm pretty.
Well, that's Stark Tower.
That is true. That is Stark Tower.
I don't remember if they move. For some reason, because in Iron Man 3, his mansion on the sea gets destroyed.
Yeah,
and that looks more like L.A.
Yeah,
but anyway,
I think you're right.
The point is, he flies out, and while he's flying into just stratosphere, and he's being chased by military planes that are real, like military grade jets.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's real. We know the military, if they saw something like that, they'd probably respond in a certain way. We can attribute, like our minds can wrap around that. And then in the background you see LA. We know that's a real place that we can connect to. Right? So yes, we have this man who's obviously CGI'd into this super high-tech armor, but at the same time we get this realism that it's immersed into our world. We can really understand that. Where I think certain films fail, like I'm going to use Quantumania for example.
Go.
We have to wrap our minds around the fact that they are in an infinitesimal, small-scale universe that is imperceptible, but yet houses all these things that it in itself is its own universe. That's really hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, if you think of the numbers, the scales, and how everything works, that's like really hard to conceptualize. And the only way you can really make that real within a movie is computer, like it's CGI. Like that whole movie, you look at it, it's just one CGI scene after another and everything that they're working in, which is like, it's fine, but to a certain extent, right? You need that connection to reality. And if you don't have that, I feel like fans really just, it doesn't draw them in. They feel uneasy and they're just not as likely to like it. But there's like movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, I feel like do a really good job where you're in another world, you're on another planet, but most of the sets on there were actually real. The aliens were just like heavy prosthetics, so it seemed like, oh, that could be like someone you could talk to, someone that's like an alien that's real, and they're in places that are real that you can go and visit. So, I mean, there's just a balance that I feel like Marvel is missing in that aspect.
I get what you're saying, and kind of what are the major takeaways that like I get from, like what you're talking about with like Quantumania is like when I first saw the movie, a big feel that I had, even though that this isn't, a Marvel movie, is I feel like I was watching a Star Wars movie. Like me personally, like I am a fan of Star Wars. It's just I feel like it was weird to kind of see. It was almost like, in my opinion, like, with Star Wars and a bunch of alien planets, like even though that I believe like a large part of Star Wars, it's, set in like, real places, like even though like, okay, like Star Wars might set on planet Endor, like they're filming in some actual forest somewhere. Right. With Quantumania, I just feel like kind of like what you were saying, like we have to wrap our heads around, this very small place that like, there's a whole other world. And then like within that, like, yeah, there were some people like, that like had, say, a human appearance while everyone else was, well, I won't say everyone else, a large part of the people we saw were not human. So
it's like they're floating heads at a certain point. It's like everything else is like completely fake, but they're using their face and maybe the neck area, and the rest is just like, they can completely manipulate everything within this movie. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that is definitely a problem that they face, and I don't even know if they recognize that as a problem, because if you look at their best movies, you can find this. I feel like Winter Soldier is one of the best movies. First of all, they take a plot line that has been solidified within cinemas, which is it's more of like a spy movie, right? So they have the realism aspect of a spy movie, and then they interject these really good characters that they've already established as good characters, right? Like Captain America did really well, and again, that was a lot based on it's just a guy who looks like a normal guy. Like obviously it's just Chris Evans, but you have this idea that he's super strong, super fast, and has all these heightened abilities. It's like, cool, all right, we can like wrap our heads around that. And then it follows this storyline very similar to, espionage, and there's corruption within the S.H.I.E.L.D., complex, and it was just really well written, had great characters, and you didn't have things taking away from it like Quantumania. You're in this really hard to wrap around idea, small place, and there wasn't a lot of CGI in that movie besides like the battleship aspect, but you don't even see that really, except like when it crashes back into what is it, like Baltimore Harbor or whatever?
I believe so. Yeah, it's been a little while since I've seen Captain America: Winter Soldier, but I completely agree. Another thing, because kind of, I guess the big hard hitting question that I have, well, one of the big ones, is with recent Marvel movies. So we'll say the Quantumanias, the Marvels movie. Well, I won't say that one because we both haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness had some criticism toward it. So just recent Marvel movies that you've seen, do you think that the Marvel MCU deserves some of the criticism that those movies have been getting? Another thing to add into that would also be if you've seen some of the TV shows, because before hearing your answer, because I know a lot of people are just so against the idea of the TV shows, which I feel like a lot of people, a lot of the WandaVisions, the Lokis, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know this from the business side like you might, but I feel like if COVID was not as big of a thing, we might have seen those into actual movies. Because at least WandaVision, I feel like it was made to be a movie.
Yeah, that one definitely felt more like it was supposed to be in a movie. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, from the business side, Disney needs TV shows for Disney Plus, because they have certain markets that they have to compete with alongside, because what we're seeing right now is streaming platforms, right? So they're competing with Netflix, they're competing with, what is it now? HBO Now, but it's called just
I think it's just Max.
Max, that's what it is. Yeah. They're all these new platforms are coming out, and Disney, being Disney, has to be the top. I mean, they already have really good content, but they actually scale in comparison to the amount of TV shows and content that, say, Netflix has, because they're just longer established. Mm-hmm. So with COVID and with the emergence of these platforms, I feel like the business did get in the way of a lot of the Marvel productions, just because they're competing on a lot of fronts, and then they had a lot of obstacles while competing on those fronts and still trying to maintain the integrity of, pre-COVID or in the middle of COVID, I guess. No, that was all pre-COVID of Endgame, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, another thing that I have to say is they're also on the rebound off of the greatest movie lineup that had an actual conclusion, right?
Right.
So all the movies prior to Endgame in some way built up towards Endgame.
Right.
And I think that's why it would made it absolutely special and just amazing to watch. But after Endgame, where do you go?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people
don't
understand.
They're trying to hold on to a lot of the players from the original Avengers. But we know, because we've seen Tony Stark's dead, Captain America's gone. There's plot holes, and people that don't really agree with a lot of what's going on there. Mm-hmm. But the original Avengers are gone, so why should we even care about these other Avengers and where they go from here? Because it's you either kill them off or you send them off in the sunset. Right. It's okay, so why should we care? Why should we go see this movie? Because a lot of what brought people to the movies in the first place in Marvels was, how's this going to connect to Thanos? How's this connect to the Infinity Stones coming together, and how are they going to stop this ultimate threat? Mm-hmm. But now we're in this weird gray area where it's okay, they've announced Kang as the big bad, but even we don't know that now with what the controversies there.
I was going to say, because I think they've announced that they're going to shift toward Doctor Doom, because the actor who played Kang, I can't think of his name right now.
Jonathan Majors.
Thank you. He's been in a lot of controversy, and I feel Marvel is wanting to go with Doctor Doom to try to get some of their fans back, because I haven't read a lot of the comics, but I do know that Doctor Doom is a huge player in the Marvel universe.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think they've painted themselves in kind of a corner with that. I don't agree with a lot of the strategy that they went with, especially in the timeline route that they're going down, because that, again, you get into the timelines. Let me put it this way. The reasons why I think the emergence of comic book movies has been a relatively new thing that where it's exploded within Marvel, right? And DC's trying to catch up, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, what was it? It was just comic book, like kids' TV shows based off of very different comic books that had been running since like the 40s and 50s, right? But the things why comic books, I feel like, weren't as popular in reading material and had a very small like section of people who really liked them, you know, comic book nerds, as we would call them. I feel like it was because of how infinite they felt, if that makes sense. Because someone could die in a comic book, but they can come back, right? There's no real consequences within comic books. And one way that they fill those plot holes is with timelines and multiverses and like, oh, this is universe, blah, 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 right? And for the longest time, people just didn't get that, and it just made them feel disconnected with characters. And it really took a very small audience to be like, we can see past that because these are still great characters and great stories. But again, it gets to the Maya principle. The most of the population didn't really wrap their heads around that. They didn't like comic books because it's like, oh, anything can happen at a certain point. They like people that they can really invest in. And when they go into a movie, they want to feel invested that, oh, if something happens to this character, they don't have a rebound to fall onto. You know, and sadly we felt like real life consequences of Chadwick Boseman, right? If this was a comic book, you could bring him back, keep writing them, because comic books live on forever. But we're dealing with real people and real consequences. But when you add the timeline in, and like, oh, the timeline's rupturing, and like all these people can leak in, and all different variants can leak in, it's like, yeah, you get that idea of, okay, well then they can say that a Black Panther from a different universe that doesn't look like Chadwick Boseman is now the Black Panther in this universe. But then you're losing that credibility that you've built and that emotional connection that you've built with him. So I felt that was a huge mistake in terms of Marvel and going down the pathway of timelines and multiversal theory, because that's what made Endgame so great. They dipped their toe into that, but they found a way to keep it consistent and be like, we're not going down that route, because that just comes into huge plot holes down the road. And, you know, if they did completely go down into that, it would have taken away from like Tony dying, you know? And that's what really like solidified that as a great movie, the amount of sacrifice, especially what we've seen in the past with other movies where he wasn't seen as like the sacrifice guy or like the guy to make that call that would put himself in front of others. Because like once you go down that, it just takes away from it. And now audiences aren't as invested, and now you have audiences who would rather just wait until they see it on, you know, some streaming service, and maybe if they have free time, they'll see the movie instead of box office, which is where they're, you know, that's where Disney's like, why aren't people immediately seeing this or paying extra money to go see this, or, you know, whatever. So
I totally get it. And so I want to backtrack to something that you had said earlier, because it was around the time you mentioned Chadwick Boseman, because I understand, you know, like Chadwick Boseman had, like what you were saying, a real life problem that, you know, you just can't fix like a comic book can. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman.
Huge loss.
Yeah, with, you know, like the casting of characters, because, like, in my opinion, I do feel like movies do have to have the right person playing their roles.
Absolutely.
Like with Robert Downey Jr. playing Tony Stark, perfectly cast. Chris Evans playing Captain America, perfectly cast.
Yeah.
Chadwick Boseman playing Black Panther, perfectly cast. Feel like, you know, I consider pretty much from the very first Iron Man to Endgame my childhood.
Yeah.
Because like you were saying, when certain movies came out, like when the first Black Panther came out, it's like, how is this going to tie into the other Marvel movies, and how is this going to, you know, connect to the future?
Right.
So with like casting, because like I do feel like ever since Endgame, it was like, okay, we got, you know, Shang-Chi, then they jumped in a different direction with like Doctor Strange, then, you know, we're seeing Ant-Man. So it's almost like we get one movie, then we get another movie, and like we don't build on to some of these movies. Do you think casting is, say, part of the problem? Because like I feel like we don't, not to say that the actors who play some of these heroes are bad actors. It's more so I feel like we don't get a lot of time to get used to seeing these actors. Because with like, I don't know if there's going to be a second Shang-Chi that came out. If I remember correctly, I think that box office for that movie, I think it had a pretty decent profit.
It was pretty decent.
But with, you know, like it might be a few years until we see him again. And I feel like with Iron Man, like between the first and the third one, like I feel like they came out and like decent time. And even so, we got other movies with Tony Stark in them as Iron Man. So do you think that, like, say, casting is part of the problem with we get introduced to one movie, then it might be years until we get that same movie again, or like that sequel?
Casting, I mean, it has to fit the character. First of all, one of the biggest things of why I said the Marvels wasn't going to do well is, first of all, you have to have characters that you care about. Then you have to fit real-life actors that people care about to those characters, and then portray them at a first glance as like a first trailer or something in a way that people goes, ooh, I can really see that. Or like, ooh, they're going to do a great job. And I feel like and the biggest why I knew Marvels was going to fail is because I feel like they did not achieve that with Brie Larson. She was a very controversial in her, like, the way that she, carried herself throughout that character, how people saw her in that character, I feel like is very controversial. And then you have the Kamala Khan, which I heard is she's the best part of the Marvels, which is, I feel it's like that's great for her because she's a young actress and whatnot. But at the same time, her character, Miss Marvel, is relatively new, especially in the capacity that she's playing it. Mm-hmm. Does not have a lot of background, so a lot of people were not invested in that. And then the people who did watch the show, I am not included, but it did not do very well because people really did not care. So if you're going to bring a new like a young actress who's not really known into a character that's not really known, I don't know why Marvel is, like, at that point they're just going based off, they green-lighted it based off of, oh, we're Marvel, people are going to see it because it's a Marvel movie. That's not enough, especially if you want to reach the numbers you want to reach. You can't go back off that base alone. And then they added Rambo. I know her last name is Rambo. Photon, is that her name? She's the third one in the Marvels.
I think, yeah, because she was in WandaVision. I don't know her actual name, but I do know who you're talking about, though.
Right, and even how she got her powers was so confusing and such a minor part to play within that series. And then they completely introduced her in this movie as a full-on hero that we're supposed to care about. Mm-hmm. But it's like, again, an unknown actress playing an unknown character in a movie that they're trying to have three characters. And then, it's really hard to pull off a movie where you have multiple heroes working together. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to add in the fact that those three characters have to go through this thing where they, like, switch powers or places every time they use their powers, which was a really confusing concept in the trailer. Mm-hmm. And then on top of all that, which is another point I want to hit on, they threw in a completely unknown villain. At that point, what are we going to see it for? We don't know who the villain is. We don't know what they're going up against. We don't really care about. I mean, besides Brie Larson, she had probably the biggest box office opening. But again, there was, like, people weren't fully accepting of her. And that movie wasn't, like, it did well, but considered among the Marvel movies, it's definitely not among the best ones. Mm-hmm. So then people were like, or at least in my opinion, I was like, why would I go see this? And I feel like the villain aspect is such an important thing that Marvel recently has completely put off. Besides Kang, but even Kang, it's like, I only saw the first season of Loki, but like he was like this timekeeper, but now he's keeping all his other variants at bay, but now they're all coming. And it's like, okay, but how do we wrap our head around, like, thousands or even millions or even like hundreds of millions of this big bad? And that just takes away from the character. So I didn't like how they went about that. I mean, can you name the main villain in the Captain Marvel movie? Can you name the main villain? I mean, that was like the big thing with Thor: The Dark World. They're like, what was that guy's name? Like Malachi, the Dark Elf?
I believe so, yeah.
It was like, why should we care, right? If anything that Marvel should take from DC, it was Heath Ledger's Joker. Heath Ledger's Joker revolutionized the villain. They turned that comic book movie into an Oscar-winning performance and legendary movie of all time. Marvel should look at that and say, okay, see, that's what takes a mediocre comic book adaptation into a legendary movie, is you have to have a legendary hero against a legendary or legendary performance level actor, performance, villain, right? Because when you put those two together, why wouldn't you want to go see that? Because that's what people are. When you pick up a comic, what's always on the comic? It's the main guy against the main bad guy. That's what makes you pick it up. So it should be the same thing in a movie. Marvel's so concentrated in like how this affects the multiverse, or how we should be connecting this to timelines in a certain way that connects to future movies that we haven't even established yet. You could probably get away with that within the past because they had a clear established Infinity Stone like build up to Endgame. And it's like, okay, we want to watch this because we want to know how this incorporates into the final result. But right now, we don't know what the final result is. And especially now with Jonathan Majors, we have no reason to care, like, at all. And then with Loki, they, like, playfully tossed out the importance of the Infinity Stones by using as paperweights, which I thought was really stupid. But, you know, I guess it does make sense if you have, you know, time on your side or whatnot. But, like, I don't know. There's just a lot of things that they go back on, and it just comes down to them taking away why the audience should care.
I understand. Another thing that, another thing I kind of wanted to bring back up would be, this is kind of what, changed my mind. Gonna go in a slightly different direction.
Okay.
So I guess really what I'm thinking of is with Marvel movies, with like, even though you touched on this with connecting it back to Heath Ledger. So would you say that, like, are there any, say, with future Marvel movies, let's just say whatever the next big Marvel movie that's supposed to come out. Would you say that there's any changes that, like, from here on out that, you know, Marvel would need to do to, like, bring their fans back? And I understand there's probably a lot of things that you could say, but what would you say is, like, I guess one of the first things that Marvel should do to bring back those fans from, like, the Infinity Saga, like you were mentioning, like people who grew up with Marvel then became disinterested, you know, kind of since Endgame. So what is one change that you would make if you were in charge?
I mean, that is a hard one, just considering that they're already going in a direction. In a perfect world, what I would do was, I wouldn't say reset the Marvel universe, but they need to find a new hero and has a really good foil to him in a villain, him or her, you know. They just need to go back to the drawing board. They need to go through the database of how many heroes and villains. Like, one that I would really like to see that I've been wanting to see in a long time is actually Nova. Nova is such an energetic, youthful character, which is what they've already been going towards now because, you know, again, they're in the actor live adaptation movie franchise, like, right? Which comes with its difficulties, especially when we see Jonathan Majors or we see the death of Chadwick Boseman. But if you're going to commit to something like we need younger people because we're going to expend this 10 plus years, you know, then you should have really good younger characters. And Nova has been a well-established character. I mean, one of the failures I thought of the Infinity Saga was the introduction of the Nova Corps with Guardians of the Galaxy, with, like, Nova and his powers. I thought they were going to be introduced, like, right after Guardians of the Galaxy when we never really heard about it, never really, you know, went into that again. They've announced Nova as a movie a couple times, but, like, his whole thing is it's a teenage boy who finds himself with technology that gets him certain powers. But I would have put him immediately into space fighting aliens. I want him on Earth. I want him fighting, like, real villains. Like, Spider-Man did that so well. They took the alien aspect, like in the first one, from the New York, right? They had some guys who creatively put together some really cool alien technology and used that to fight and be, like, an Avenger level, like, threat. Before, you know, that was a term in the third movie. But, like, the Vulture, really cool character, especially for an upcoming and emerging hero.
Right.
And that was such a good foil. Like, this kid, he comes, like, through Tony Stark, he has some really cool technology. He's got the ability, he's got the power. He doesn't have the experience, though. Then you got this guy who's willing to do anything, which kind of puts him above him because Spider-Man's not willing to do everything. He's got this moral compass. We got a guy who has got no moral compass, but, like, equal if not better technology, right? Spider-Man has to find a way to beat him. That is a great story, great foil, great like classic character, a great new spin on the character, because like you can't really have like a half bird man. So that's where they took a classic character that didn't really make a lot of sense, but they made it work, and they made a lot of sense, which I really liked. I feel like they need to find a good character and do the same exact thing. They got to bring them to Earth, make them face their challenges on Earth here, before they start fighting. Like Quantumania, we're supposed to care about Scott Lang's daughter, who they switched the actress who played her already, so we don't even have that connection. She's going to take up the mantle, right? They already have this like new Avengers, younger Avengers kind of thing playing that no one really cares about right now. But we're supposed to care about her. But the first like thing that she's in or role that she has to take up is being thrown into the quantum realm, fighting Kang. Like, we don't know what she can do. We don't know. We have like no reason to invest ourselves within this character. So I would completely avoid that if I were Marvel, and follow like more of a Spider-Man Homecoming strategy, but like, you know, take the good from the bad. Because like, again, Spider-Man, it's in New York. Everyone knows New York. You know, a lot of, you know, most of the time where he's swinging, he's CGI'd, but he's also walking around in the suit a lot. You know that it's a real suit that he's wearing. Like, it connects you back to reality. So before they start shooting off into timelines and new universes and these characters that operate on a scale that people can't even comprehend, they need to establish characters on the ground at home. But it's got to be characters they care about, because you can argue that, oh, they did that with Kamala Khan with Miss Marvel and it flopped. So how do you like attribute that? And it's like, again, like I said, it was a character no one really cared about. It was an actress that no one had really heard about. You know, Tom Holland was relatively not well known, but Spider-Man is at a god level of people being able to recognize it.
I was going to say, everybody knows who Spider-Man is.
Everybody knows who Spider-Man is. So people were like, all right, there's this new kid. They've done this a bunch of times. Let's see how he does it, or like how he does, right? And there's also criticisms of like who's the better Spider-Man, right? But that also adds to why people want to go see it, to see if he fulfills that.
Right.
A Miss Marvel movie, they're like, wait, is she like the younger sister of Captain Marvel? Why does she share the same name? There's just like so many things that keep people from like, I don't really get it, or like, why should I invest in it? So if I were Marvel, that's what I would do. I would probably stick more to the Spider-Man level of grounding a character and then expanding them.
I understand. Really, I just have two closing questions. Both are pretty easy.
Okay.
Well, by pretty easy, I mean more so they're not as hard-hitting of a question. This first one is, if you have a favorite Marvel movie,
okay,
what would you say your favorite Marvel movie is? If you want me to go first to answer this, I can.
Sure, why don't you go first?
Black Panther.
Black Panther, great movie.
Black Panther is my absolute favorite.
Again, great villain.
I was going to say, I love Killmonger. I love Michael B. Jordan as an actor. I feel like he did as amazing as, you know, one would, you know, expect. I feel like he did great. I feel like, you know, the movie had stakes. I feel like anything that you would want in a movie, a superhero movie, I feel like you got it.
Right.
And I feel like, you know, even just in that one movie alone, and like I understand that, you know, we got a relationship with, you know, T'Challa in Captain America Civil War. So I understand we have that prior relationship. But even in the Black Panther alone, I feel like it could have been 30 minutes of the movie and I was already invested and cared about all of the characters introduced. But
well, they did a great job of giving you a little bit of Black Panther before giving you that movie too, you know, which I thought Marvel did really well in that aspect, because they get you invested in the character. Like the first scenes that you see him, his father dies, and he immediately suits up for action, right? But at the same time, we see at the end of the movie, he's willing to forgive Baron Zemo for killing his father, to the point he's not going to murder him, right? But he's going to face justice, which, you know, shows a moral outline of the character, what the character can do as they're like running. It was like 60 miles per hour down that road, and like how powerful he was against big time players, right? But like they didn't go so far. They just gave you just the right amount and then gave you that amazing movie. So yeah, Black Panther's definitely up there. I would probably say, just because, I would probably say Guardians of the Galaxy is probably my favorite. Just what they do really well in that movie that they haven't done so well in other movies is making the soundtrack a part of the experience, which is very hard to do, which I would love to see them do in some other way in other movies. Not like the cassette, because this whole thing was he's from a different era, and he's got a cassette player, and like, which, great creative, like that is something they took from a character, like what we can do to incorporate that into his personality, which then incorporates into the movies, and then they based like soundtracks off of it. But like, I don't know, I think that is one of the more creative. They could have gone really wrong with that, because one of the hardest things you can do within superhero movies, in my opinion, is like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 3 deficit, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man 2 deficit is where you get too many villains or even heroes together, and it takes away from the experience, because you have all these stories going on that you have to catch up with, right? So what I thought Guardians of the Galaxy did really well is you have so many of these, because they're a team. You have to establish a team early on, why we should care about this team and every single character within that team and against the bad guy that they're going against, and make us care about what villain they're going against. Ronan the Destroyer, no one's ever heard of, but they did that character so well, and why that team should go against them. I mean, it's really, if you think about it, it's a masterpiece on how to get an audience to care about these people that are rough around the edges, right? We shouldn't really care about, because they're all criminals, right? We care about them. We care about them bonding together against a common cause, but even accept that they're not perfect, you know? And then you have this cool soundtrack in the back, and then they're in space the entire time in different worlds, and they don't bombard you with CGI. I mean, there's so many things that go right within that movie that really should not have gone right. So I just think that overall that is my favorite Marvel movie.
I understand. Those are the questions I had for you. If there's anything else that you'd like to add about the idea of how the MCU can help regain its fan base, feel free. The floor is yours.
Well, you know, with the whole Jonathan Majors thing, Marvel's at a really rocky place right now. And they could switch to Doctor Doom, but that would put so much pressure on the Fantastic Four doing really well. And in the past, that has not gone very well. I wouldn't put my money on them achieving that. That's my childhood. Marvel movies are my childhood, so I'm always hoping that they do better than I expect, right? But so far, it's just been one disappointment after the other. So going forward, I would step away from TV shows, and if you are going to step towards a TV show, you're going to need to make people want it. So for Marvel, I would stop making TV shows until they had a solid idea that could clearly be a show, and then they got to pump a lot of money into that. Now, that's more difficult because obviously shows put together have more runtime and more information and more characters and stuff like that than a movie has to put it in between like a 3-hour or 2.5-hour movie, right?
Right.
So if they're going to do that, they're going to have a storyline based on Earth, right? Because no one wants to watch multiple hours of just pure CGI like nonsense. So they need something based on Earth, but also something that we can really care about. See, with the Captain America and Falcon, that was okay. It wasn't bad. I didn't dislike that show. It was very centered on Earth. I mean, we got this feeling that it was just like two military veterans working together, like good cop, bad cop kind of way. I mean, there was something there, but it just seemed to be missing something at the same time. So I would argue that maybe in that instance, that's them staying too grounded to Earth without going to a phantasmal like idea of something that people can really draw people in, because you always need that. Like Iron Man did that with like his villain was the size of like a building, right? It was a giant Iron Man. Like, what can beat Iron Man? What about an even bigger Iron Man that's like way stronger, good, more destructive capabilities? Like, cool. With, Captain America, Winter Soldier, Falcon and Winter Soldier. Sorry, because he becomes Captain America, but he's still Falcon. That was something that there was like a lot of politics on like what's going on there that we were more invested in than like them taking down the bad. And then Marvel played too much into you're supposed to connect with the villain on a little bit, they're morally unjustified, but their idea is there of why they're doing it, right? I feel like they played too much into that to the point it's like, should they even be like taking this person down? And it's like, I don't know. There's a lot of things that went wrong, but I felt like because it went wrong, Marvel went in a completely different direction, and then that went wrong, and it's like, so, I don't know. I just feel like they need to take shows away for a while, and if they're going to put out a show, it's got to be, like, top tier.
I get it.
Like, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it well, instead of just putting out one after the other, another, and then I'll focus back on movies, but again, it has to be with people that we care about, characters that we care about. So, I mean, that's what I would do, but again, who knows?
I understand. Really, I just want to thank you for your time. Those are all the questions I had for you.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.